anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. Now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. In just a few minutes, we're going to get into some other topics, but I thought I'd just mention that especially in the second hour, we're going to come back to our news cycle. Of course, we have the tax reform bill passed by the House and Senate. It will be signed, and we want to spend just a little bit of time talking about what that means to you. One of the very helpful graphics we posted on our Facebook page, and we'll now have a link also on our webpage, was the impact of tax cuts and the Jobs Act on a variety of different individuals. It takes 8 different scenarios. Some people are single, some are married, some have children, some that don't. Some have a very low income, some have a very high income. And by looking at this, you can get a little bit of a sense as to how this tax reform package will affect you. And I'll give you an advance hint. Almost all of you are going to get a tax cut, and that's certainly a good thing. And so we'll talk about that. We also want to talk about the impact that it is having already in the business world. AT&T has promised a $1,000 bonus as soon as President Trump signs the tax cut bill to individuals in their company, and also an extra $1 billion that will be invested in America next year. Boeing has announced an additional $300 million that it will spend on its employees and charities. Cincinnati Bank is going to bonus all of its 13,000 employees with $1,000. Wells Fargo matching its $15 minimum wage and giving $400 million to charities. Comcast, NBC Universal giving out $1,000 bonuses to its 100,000 workers, and on and on and on. So we'll certainly have some things to talk about that. And a vote today in the United Nations, where 128 nations condemned the United States for a decision to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. There were only 9 that voted against it. One, of course, the United States, 4 other countries that you might know of, and a lot of others you haven't. You had 2 countries, a couple of countries that we know that abstained, Canada and Mexico. I guess there were actually 35 abstentions. But again, 128 countries voting against us, so we'll have some things to talk about that in the second hour. So we'll cover a lot of that. But I certainly wanted to give you a chance to hear some of the information we're going to provide now on the subject of Mormonism. This is something that we've talked about over the years. I know Marlon Maddox probably had Walter Martin in studio with him at one point or another. I know that I've had everybody from Ed Decker to Hank Hanegraaff. And there is this new book out. It's entitled Leaving Mormonism, Why 4 Scholars Changed Their Minds. And there's something very unique about this. Each one of the writers is a former member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. All 4 of them have doctoral degrees and have left Mormonism for the evangelical faith. And one of those individuals who we're going to be talking with today is Dr. Lynn Wilder, who is professor at Florida's Gulf Coast University. As you would already imagine from what I've said, a former Mormon, but at one time a tenured professor at Brigham Young University. You may be familiar with her previous book, Unveiling Grace, the story of how we found our way out of the Mormon Church, but now is one of the 4 contributors to Leaving Mormonism, Why 4 Scholars Changed Their Minds. It's published by Kriegel. You might be able to find it in your local bookstore, but we have information about that also on our website, pointofview.net. Dr. Lynn Wilder, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Kirby, thank you for being interested in this topic. It's my life.
Well, it is, and it's a long one. And let's, if we can, maybe establish a few things. First of all the kind of contributors have their doctoral degrees, but you have something kind of unique in that most of the former Mormons, ex-Mormons that we've interviewed on this program, grew up as Mormons because their family was. Most of the people I've ever met at Brigham Young University were Mormons because they came from Mormon families. I know when you did the interview there, they said, you're kind of unique because you converted to Mormonism. So tell us a little bit of that story between you and your husband and how you decided to actually join the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Well, you might be surprised. According to Pew Institute 2011, 83% of people that march into Mormonism come right out of biblical Christianity. Folks who were nominal Christians, I would say, like my husband and myself. I grew up Presbyterian with parents that took us to church every week, but I never cracked open the Bible, and I could not have told you the salvation story, I don't think. So for me, Christianity, religion, was kind of a social thing, the idea that, our family needed some morals. So after 3 years of marriage, my husband and I were actually looking for a church, and we had gone to several, and nothing seemed too interesting to us. Although I had just read the Old Testament, and I remember reading that Israel would return at some point in time, and I realized Israel had returned to her homeland in 1948, and so I kind of got interested in these last days prophecies, and when the Mormon missionaries knocked on our door, their badges said, "The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints," which of course is the King James version of last days, and they said they were the experts. Unfortunately, I did not know enough to realize that they weren't.
And so, again, at first you were fascinated by it, but then they actually challenged, if I remember, your husband to just pray about whether or not, indeed, the Book of Mormon was true. And so finish this story, because it's kind of intriguing how you ended up there.
Well, one of the things they do so well, these are well-educated, clean-cut, conservative, friendly, often in positions of influence and power, right? In the military and the CIA, many are professors. Often socially, you can look to Mormons, and they're great people. However, their theology is certainly not at all biblically Christian. My husband did go to his knees and ask the Lord whether the Book of Mormon was true. That's what they ask you to do, and then they tell you if the Book of Mormon's true, if you get a spiritual answer that the Book of Mormon's true, if you get this warm feeling, then Joseph Smith was a prophet, and all the four Book of Mormon scriptures are true, and it all falls in line. Well, my husband did have a dream after that and decided that we needed to march into Mormonism, which we did. Within about 6 months, I would say, I was also extremely dug in, crying, bearing testimony that I knew that Joseph Smith was a prophet and the Mormon church was the only true church on the face of the earth. Very emotional experience. Mormons test truth through feelings.
Well, again, we're going to take a break and come back, and I want to come back to how you ended up at Brigham Young University, because, again, I love what they said. You've never lived in Utah. You've never attended BYU. You're a pure convert, not exactly the kind of person they normally would expect. And then talk about some of the doctrines and other issues. And if you've been paying attention over the last few years, you've even seen some evangelical scholars meeting with Mormon teachers, and they're trying to develop dialogues. And so we're going to get into this in a little more detail. And, of course, if you'd like to ask questions or make comments, we'd love to hear from you as well. 1-800-351-1212. Privileged to have with us today Dr. Lynn Wilder, and she is one of the contributors of the book, Leaving Mormonism, Why Four Scholars Changed Their Minds. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, during this Christmas week, I've taken the time to discuss the theology of some of the Christmas hymns and carols that we sing. Today, I'd like to talk about the First Noel. It is an English song dating back to the 16th century. Some people believe that the First Noel was French because of the French spelling of Noel, but it is actually an English song. The French word Noel does mean Christmas and is relevant to the lyrics of the song. The First Noel was published in 1833 when it appeared in the work Christmas Carols Ancient and Modern. The first line of the song suggests a December date for the birth of Christ. The first Noel, the angels did say, was to certain poor shepherds in the fields as they lay. in the fields where they lay keeping their sheep on a cold winter's night that was so deep. Although many doubt that Jesus was born in December, there are some theologians, such as the author of the chronological aspects of the life of Christ, who believe that a December date is possible. Whatever the case about the date of the birth of Jesus, the song continues, "Born is the King of Israel." It reminds us that a king was born that night, yet few understood the significance of a birth in Bethlehem. Even the wise men from the east did not completely understand the significance of his birth, but they were guided to him by a star. For all to see there was a star shining in the east beyond them far, and to the earth it gave great light, and so it continued both day and night. The song continues on to say that 3 wise men came from a country far. The Bible does not tell us how many wise men there were. What we do know, there were 3 kinds of gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. What the Bible clearly teaches, however, is that Jesus was born and that he is the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have with us today Dr. Lynn Wilder, one of the contributors to the book Leaving Mormonism, Why 4 Scholars Changed Their Minds, published by Kriegel. You can find out more about that book on our website, pointofview.net. And Lynn, let's see if we can get you to Brigham Young University. Of course, then you get your kids to Brigham Young University. But once you're there and you're a professor, which is intriguing to me right at the beginning, that's when some of the concerns began to develop, because even though your students were intelligent and diligent and religious and things of that nature, there were some times when you began to sense some concerns. And one is, of course, when you were to teach some of these issues that would be involved in what we might call multiculturalism and to deal with marginalized students, because you began to realize that some of the doctrines that were held by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints weren't favorable towards some of those students. True?
Wow, that's true. A year after being at Brigham Young, I was assigned to teach diversity because our accrediting agency required that we teach diversity at Brigham Young. Brigham Young, my bosses were not particularly happy with teaching diversity, told me I was not to use the term social justice, but that I could teach diversity. My very first course, my students, my LDS students, started telling me about something called the curse of Cain. Now, I'm embarrassed to tell you, and maybe this was a good thing, I had never heard of the curse of Cain. I had no idea what they were talking about. They said that God cursed Cain with dark skin because he sinned and murdered his brother. Now, unfortunately, I didn't go to the Bible and read that passage. That is not what that passage says, but that is what Mormonism teaches. Those teachings are also in the Book of Mormon, and they're in the Pearl of Great Price. Mormons have 4 standard works of Scripture. One is the Bible. They believe is not always translated correctly, but their other 3 standard works are perfect and come directly from Jesus, supposedly. And 2 of those standard works say 26 times that dark skin is a curse, that God actually curses people for iniquity and gives them dark skin. That's what happened in the Book of Mormon. Now, Mormons, I would not say today are necessarily racist. However, they have 26 scriptures that say that dark skin is a curse. I was unaware of those scriptures, although I'd been a Mormon for 25 years at that point. But my students then began to teach me, and many of them were generational Mormons, that this was inherent in Mormon teachings, at least in the past. And, of course, the problem they have with racism is that those scriptures are still there, and they teach that their scriptures are pure truth and utterly reliable. I honestly did not walk away from Mormonism at that point, but God softened my heart with this issue and with the issue of polygamy. Mormonism teaches that polygamy is an eternal principle.
Sure. And again, you would go into restaurants and see a lot of families that obviously had polygamous relationships and marriages, and that was another kind of stepping stone, wasn't it?
It was. Estimates are between 30,000 and 100,000 still live polygamy in the Intermountain West today. The state of Utah never prosecutes, although it's against the law. During the Olympics, I was actually in Denmark at one point during the 2002 Olympics when they were in Salt Lake, and I was listening to this reporter in Denmark talk about polygamy in Utah. Yes, there's a lot of polygamy in Utah. But in the 1880s, Ulysses S. Grant was president of the United States. He marched the U.S. Army out to Utah and threatened that they should stop practicing polygamy. And so polygamists in the 1880s went underground, and many ran to Canada and many ran to Mexico. You probably have heard Mitt Romney say his grandfather was born in Mexico. He has a polygamous past, and he does have one of those families that ran to Mexico.
Well, again, let's keep the story going, because then after time it seems like you did start reading the Bible, and there were some other things that you began to question whether or not the Book of Mormon, the Pearl of Great Price, and the Doctrine and Covenants were utterly reliable, and whether or not Joseph Smith was really the prophet that the church said he was. Share a little bit of that, if you might.
I think it's normal for Mormons to take these issues that seem a little odd and put them on this proverbial shelf. And at one point there becomes a point of that shelf breaking. There are just too many things that kind of don't add up. What actually happened for me was my husband and I sent all of our sons on Mormon missions. First one went to Russia for 2 years. The second one to Denmark for 2 years. Our third son went to Orlando, Florida on his Mormon mission, began to bump up against evangelicals, read the New Testament 12 times during his Mormon mission, got saved on his Mormon mission, and then began to beg his parents back home in Utah to simply read the Bible as a child with no preconceived notions. That is what changed my heart and mind. I wasn't very far into the book of John before I just was going, this is not the gospel of Mormonism. And I realized we had a different God, a different Jesus, a different way to salvation, and couldn't be the same gospel. There was no reconciling Mormonism with the gospel of the Bible.
Let's say we can talk about the book for just a minute, and we'll get into some of the chapter you have here on kind of post-Mormon mental health. Corey Miller is an individual we know, of course, from Ratio Christi, as well as, of course, you and Vince Eccles and LaTanya Scott. All four of you have a doctoral degree in one area or another. All four of you are former members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so speak for just a minute why the four of you got together to write this book. Who would benefit from reading this book, and how might it begin to change the spiritual direction of some of the people that I know that you want as your intended audience?
You may or may not know that there's been quite an exodus out of Mormonism in recent years. The Mormon Church for a long time was the fastest growing church in the U.S. or close to the fastest growing church even in the world, right, exponentially. However, in recent years, because of what can be found on the Internet, folks are not joining Mormonism and even leaving. And many academics like us have left Mormonism. Most of those academics and people that consider themselves scholarly and think logically and that are well-educated and intelligent leave Mormonism for atheism, for the new atheism in particular, or for agnosticism. And these are the folks that we had on our hearts when we wrote this book, although it has a much broader audience. The very last chapter of the book, Corey and I wrote together. We go through some logical fallacies, some things that are taught in Mormonism that don't even make any sense logically, right? And then what the consequences of believing those kind of things are. We go through some typical arguments from new atheists about why there is no God. So we go through things like the reliability of the Bible, are science and religion really not compatible, some of those kind of things. I talk a lot about relativism and postmodernism because most social science folks are in the postmodern camp as well as folks in multiculturalism. So our point in this book, though, is helping people have a reason. Okay, you've decided Mormonism isn't true. You've decided Joseph Smith wasn't a prophet. But why throw the Jesus
right? What next?
baby out with the bad religion bathwater, right?
Good.
Consider that there might be a true God.
Well, we'll come back and talk a little bit more about that and also what you call post-Mormon mental health, a very important aspect of that as well. But let me just mention that as we're going to a break here, that one of the things we've been encouraging you to do is to consider what you might do for your gift before year end. And as we've pointed out, we've been broadcasting since 1972. That's 45 years when Marlon Maddox began. And so we have a $45,000 matching challenge that was put on the table just about 2 weeks ago. And we're getting close to a time in which we desperately need to hear from you. So please visit the website, pointofview.net. We'll be back with more right after this.
Today, you can make a difference, but you have to act. Recently, Kerby sat down with a couple in California, Stan and Jennifer. Jennifer said, like many Christians, they were concerned about the direction of the culture, but simply hoped something would change. On one of her regular walks through the neighborhood, listening to the radio, she happened across Point of View, and before long, she was convinced wishing things would change was not enough. She began taking what she was learning and applying it and sharing it. She even went to the state capitol in Sacramento to stand up for what she believes. You would be surprised how much difference one Jennifer can make and how many Jennifers you can inspire by giving to Point of View. Your gift today will shape hearts and minds across the nation, helping to shape our future. And thanks to a surprise donor challenge, your gift will be doubled up to at least $45,000. Give today at pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. Answer the challenge. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today with Dr. Lynn Wilder, and if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. One of the 4 scholars that actually have changed their minds and have written this particular book called Leaving Mormonism. If you'd like some more information, we have a couple of things on our website. First of all, there's a link to the Facebook page, which is entitled Leaving Mormonism, or you can simply go to facebook.com and type in Leaving Mormonism, and there is an opportunity for individuals to interact with some of the material that we are talking about today. There's various posts and members and those kinds of things, so that is certainly the case. We also, of course, have information about the book. It is one that you might be able to find in your local bookstore, but if not, it's a paperback. It's published by Kriegel, 300 pages, and we have a link. You can click on the picture of the book, and that will give that information to you as well. And if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Let's take some phone calls along the way. We'll head out to Kentucky first, WYGE. Kim, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you for taking my call. I have a question. It may sound silly, but I really don't know. Are Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses, are they the same group of people?
Well, no. The Jehovah's Witnesses would be, of course, the Watchtower Society. Mormons, of course, most of them are found in Salt Lake City, Utah, although, of course, you have reorganized Mormons as well. But interestingly enough, Kim, even though we are talking about 2 very different groups, Dr. Wilder, for just a minute, let's talk about that, because they both sort of came out of about the same time period after the kind of the Second Great Awakening, the so-called burned over area, whether it was Charles Russell, whether it was Joseph Smith. There was, in some respects, some of those false teachings that all sort of came out of the same general location in the United States, right?
That's true, although Mormonism actually has more in common with Hinduism and certainly with Islam, which is interesting. Think for a moment. In Mormonism, you have another angel that brings another gospel. That also happened to Muhammad in the cave, right? Starts out Abrahamic, then that's not true, so you have to correct it with extra biblical scriptures. The result is a works-based faith where you never know in this life if you're saved, if you have eternal life. You just have to work yourself crazy. Another similarity with Islam is Mormons go to the temple, do work for the dead. You know that in Islam, if you never were able to make the pilgrimage to Mecca, when your relative dies, someone can do that in proxy for them. There is a building called the Hajj. not too much different from a Mormon temple where you go in and make covenants, etc. And then another similarity is that in the next life, a reward for the righteous in Islam would be a number of virgins, and in Mormonism would be polygamy. Very interesting, but yes, Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormonism did come out of the United States certainly Mormonism started in 1830.
And again, maybe the differences between Mormonism and Jehovah's Witnesses would say that Jesus was not God, whereas Mormons would say not only is Jesus a God, but all of you can be gods as well. So in some respects, they're very different, but in both cases, they sort of deny what you might call the deity of Jesus Christ, don't they?
Well, the Jesus of Mormonism began as a man, actually was born to a Heavenly Father, Heavenly Mother as a spirit child in the pre-existence, earned his right to come to earth, gain a body, progress, and then did eventually earn his godhood. That's a very different Jesus from the Bible, who is part of a Trinitarian God from eternity past to eternity future, who is co-eternal with the other two persons of the Godhood. In Mormonism, Heavenly Father earned his godhood first, and they're doing something called eternal progression. So Heavenly Father is farther along than Jesus. So it's not co-eternal, and it's not co-equal.
Again, let's, if we can, maybe spend just a little bit more time in your book, and we'll take some other phone calls in just a minute, 1-800-351-1212, because a key part of your book is what you call finding post-Mormon mental health. Now, that, I think, presupposes that sometimes you've got to change your worldview. You've got to begin to recognize that some of the things that you were taught were false. And as you point out, there is a natural tendency, oftentimes, when people leave the Mormon Church, not to leave the Mormon Church and become a Baptist or an evangelical or a Presbyterian, but to become an atheist or become one of the nuns, none of the above, atheist, agnostic, or no preference. And so you're concerned that in some respects, once people begin to see the falsity of the Mormon doctrine, they won't come to the truthfulness of the Scriptures. They'll just deny anything religious. Is that fair?
Yeah, that is true. And one of the reasons is one of those logical fallacies we were taught in Mormonism. We were always taught, if we're not true, nothing's true. The Mormon Church is perfect. The organization is wonderful. The people are good. If we're not true, nothing's true. The other horrendous teaching is that the Bible is not reliable. Now, I have a God who's able to put his word together and keep it together down through all ages. That's a large God. The God of Mormonism was not able to do that. Huge difference for me. But post-Mormons typically don't think to go to biblical Christians for any answers, because we were taught you are lessers, Mormons are greaters. In other words, biblical Christians have a little of the truth with their Bible, with the parts of the Bible that's true, but Mormons have the fullness of the truth because they have 4 standard works to rely on, and they have living prophets.
Well, and another aspect of mental health is that if you've been in the Mormon Church, or just a minute ago, Kim asked about Jehovah's Witnesses, or, of course, you just talked about Islam, but we can talk about a lot of these works-oriented religions. Then when you leave, in some respects, there is a sense of relief, but also there's also maybe a tendency for some either to just throw everything off or else go back into sort of a works-oriented idea. So talk about what it means to be a Mormon, because you have to be baptized, you have the sacraments, you have the temple endowment, you have the temple marriage, you have all sorts of laws of Mormonism in terms of the tithe and the fast and the Sabbath and the chastity and all those kinds of things. That's another real issue in terms of post-Mormon health, isn't it?
It's a culture and a lifestyle that's 24/7. A Mormon typically has their identity tied up in Mormonism. If you ask them who they are, I'm a Mormon. Remember the public relations campaign during the last election with Romney? I'm a policeman, I have tattoos, and I'm a Mormon. I'm a Mormon, I'm a Mormon, I'm a Mormon. Well, when you leave the Mormon church, who are you? And what do you believe? And our ministry, our son's ministry, has put together something called the LDS Doctrine Topical Guide. You can find it at unveilingmormonism.com. This is 40 things that were taught in Mormonism, and then my sons went through the scriptures and found the truth on each of those topics, like, is there a pre-existence? Do we have to have priesthood authority on the earth? Was there a great apostasy? Did the church that Jesus set up die and Joseph Smith had to bring it back? All of these things have truth. They have answers in Scripture. But it took me, Kerby, 5 years to get all of the false teachings out and to be into the Bible long enough to know what the truth was on each of those topics. So first of all, you're losing your identity, but you're also losing your social, cultural support system. Oh, my goodness, families are so close in Mormonism. And if you decide to leave, often you're cut off like a cancer. You're shunned because you might influence somebody else, and we can't have that, right? So I have a son-in-law who has Mormon parents, divorced, both remarried, and he's not allowed in either of their homes. That sometimes is the case. So our ministry works with people sometimes for years until they can get their get their feet back. And sometimes if you're living in Utah, you might lose your job. If you might lose your place to live. It can be a real upheaval, and Christians just don't understand this. They've only gone from Methodist to Baptist. They just can't even imagine what it's like to leave Mormonism. The other thing is families are a bit of an idol to a Mormon.
We'll talk about that in just a minute. We need to take one of those mandatory breaks. We'll talk about that right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. As the school semester winds down to Christmas break, it's important to take a look at all the ways students might exercise their religious freedom in celebration of the holidays. First, schools can celebrate Christmas just as easily as they can celebrate winter. Doing so provides an educational perspective of world history and the effect of religion upon culture. Schools can also deck the halls in Christmas decorations. Decorations can further the cultural and religious heritage educationally important to the holiday. Third, schools can include Christmas-themed artistic expressions in school plays. As long as it's presented in an objective manner reflecting the traditions of Christmas, it's just fine. It is fine for students to wish one another Merry Christmas or Happy Hanukkah, and even hand out gifts significant to their religious tradition. As they can throughout the year, students can also reference their faith in school assignments, class discussions, and private speeches during the holidays. The First Amendment is not suspended during the Christmas season. And finally, school employees can discuss their religious holiday traditions outside of their official roles as educators. This means teachers can attend Christmas parties and religious gatherings outside of work without fearing the loss of their job. With that, perhaps the best way to conclude is merely to say Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, and best wishes for a Happy New Year to all our students. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. I hope you enjoyed this episode of First Liberty Briefing. You can learn more amazing stories about how everyday Americans are standing up and saving religious freedom. Just visit firstliberty.org. You'll be inspired, educated, and informed. Visit firstliberty.org right now.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and we are privileged to have with us for a few more moments Lynn Wilder, Dr. Lynn Wilder, and again, she is one of the co-authors of this book, Leaving Mormonism, Why Four Scholars Changed Their Minds. Let's take another phone call or two, because this will get us into some application, I believe, as well. We'll go to Ohio. Cody, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thanks for having me. I left the Mormon church a few years ago, and now I'm a Christian. Served a 2-year mission, all that. Now I'm just trying to tell my Mormon friends the good news, about having a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, and there's no works, there's nothing, just to understand the messy history of the Mormon church. And I just kind of wonder what your guys' input would be, how I can do that. And my parents are still very active in the Mormon church also.
Well, Lynn, first of all, we want to encourage him to go to our website, or else just go directly to the Facebook page there, because that's a way in which he can connect up with you. And you really do have a ministry to help individuals like Cody and like people that Cody's trying to reach. So talk about what's available there.
We do, and there are 2 very good websites that help with ministering to Mormon family. One is called missionary911.com, and the other one is pleaseopenthedoor.com. Those are both it's very good information. There are a number of resources on our website, Unveiling Mormonism, as well. Because it was the Word of God that changed my heart and transformed me, we use the Word. You can get Mormons out of the Mormon faith through the history, but it does not bring them to Jesus. And so continually making God a part of your speech, this God of grace, what he's done in your life, how he showed up, what you read recently that just blew your socks off. And we particularly love to go to those verses that refute Mormonism, but very kindly. For instance, the Mormon missionaries, first thing they teach is that there was a great apostasy, and we'll say, well, wait a minute, you mean when Jesus set his church up, he failed, the church died? And they'll say, well, yes. And I'll open the Bible to Matthew 16:18. I don't read it to them. I don't tell them what the Bible says. I hand it to them, ask them to read it to me, and ask them what they think. I'm planting the Word of God, and I'm planting the Word of God with them that's the exact opposite of Mormon teachings. I wouldn't have known when I was LDS that the Bible says God doesn't live in temples made by human hands. I didn't know John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word. Mormons don't believe that he was God from the beginning. There's much that refutes Mormonism. And so just gently opening these kind of conversations and then using the Word and using your own personal testimony. Mormons certainly believe in emotionalism, right? When's the last time a Christian actually told someone about their Jesus with emotionalism behind it? Certainly our Jesus is worth offering.
Does that help, Cody?
Yeah, it definitely does. Thank you very much.
Let me also encourage you to go to our website, pointofview.net, or else just go to the Facebook page, which is Leaving Mormonism. That will tell you more about this book and give you a chance to interact with some of these individuals. Because, again, Corey Miller, he's really into apologetics. That last chapter, as you point out, really deals with this as well. And that, of course, is, I guess, another problem, Lynn, and that is in Mormonism, you recognize that there's no archaeological evidence for the Book of Mormon, so you tend to not trust more archaeology and science. But yet, of course, if you use archaeology and science and history, it validates the Bible. So I think this book is very helpful even to hand to an individual that might be a seeker, an individual that might have some questions, because not only are your 4 testimonies very powerful, but some of the material in the back that you have dealing with what we call apologetics objections to faith, by the new atheism, and some of the problems with the kind of the theories that are put forward in our world today will be very effective. So I want to thank you and Corey and everybody for writing the book, because it's been a great resource, and thank you for giving us a chance today to talk about it on Point of View.
Anytime. This is really, it's important stuff that 300,000 may be coming out of the church, and we need to know how to offer Jesus to them.
Well, and again, as you said, there seems to be almost a mass exodus, which is something very different than it was, say, a decade ago. And this is an opportunity for us to really begin to reach out. Nearly 50% of all Mormons who leave the faith turn to atheism. So again, we need to provide an alternative so that we don't just turn people from Mormonism, a false faith, into atheism, which is another false faith, but they actually turn them to the true faith. So thank you, Lynn, for the work that you're doing in that regard. Thank you for putting this book together, and say hello to some of these other individuals that you have written this with, because we've interviewed Corey and others on the program in the past. So thank you for being with us, and Merry Christmas.
Thank you, Kerby. You too.
Let's, if we can, take a break. When we come back, we have lots of issues in the news. We have 128 countries voting against the United States today simply because we thought it would be appropriate to put our embassy in Jerusalem rather than Tel Aviv. After all, in every other country in the world, our embassy is in the capital, but not in Israel. And 128 countries thought that was not a good idea and voted against us. I do appreciate UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, who said, you know, when a nation is singled out for attack in this organization and is disrespected, we're going to pay attention to who voted against us. And next time you come and ask us to pay more than our fair share for the United Nations, we may or we may not. Matter of fact, we may not even send foreign aid to some of the nations that voted against us. So we'll see how that plays itself out. And I'd love to get your comments. We have a tax reform package that is going to make a difference, I suspect, in all of our lives. And most of us are going to receive some kind of tax rebate. And that has caused all sorts of companies to say they're not just going to spend the money on themselves. They're going to spend it on equipment and investment, give bonuses to individuals in their company. And if you are still kind of wondering, how will this particular tax reform package affect you? We have posted on our website and also on our Facebook page something that comes from the Tax Foundation that looks at 8 different scenarios. And when we come back, I'll go into that in a little more detail. So if you're singled or married, whether you have children, don't have children, whether you take the standard deduction or you itemize, whether you put money in a tax-deferred retirement contribution or don't, we'll try to give you a little bit of a sense of what maybe your tax liability is now and what it would be in the future. And then, of course, we'll get into what has been happening over the last couple of weeks in terms of this debate and how maybe it'll even affect the 2018 elections. We're getting into that season once again. But just before we take a break, let me mention the fact that we have this $45,000 matching challenge. Why $45,000? Because Point of View has been broadcasting for 45 years. So if you go to our website, we have a banner there. It says $45,000 matching challenge. Your gift will shape hearts and minds. If you appreciated the conversation we had in the first hour about Mormonism, or appreciate the conversation we're going to have in the second hour about everything from Israel to tax reform and perhaps a couple of other issues we will get into, I hope that you'll consider what you might do, even as we go to a break right now, to go to the website, click on that banner, and make a donation. And it can be of any amount, but whatever your amount might be, it will be doubled. $100 becomes $200, $500 becomes $1,000. If instead you'd like to talk to someone off air, we will give you that order line number. It's 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. We'd appreciate hearing from you. We'll be right back.
Taylor has been listening to Point of View Radio for about 12 years, which is pretty remarkable considering today he's only 25.
In high school, when I first became aware of the political spectrum and all that, I was a conservative ideologue, basically, going with whatever conservatives said. But after listening to the show over the years, I realized that I'm supposed to be for truth. I'm supposed to be a Christian and then a conservative. And I'm supposed to look at all this
that's going on around us in today's culture through a biblical lens. And I can't thank y'all enough for that.
The you Taylor is thanking is you. People like you are the heroes who have patiently invested in Point of View Radio and made it possible to shape hearts and minds across the nation, which in the long run helps to shape our future. And you can be twice the hero today because we have a matching challenge which doubles your investment dollar for dollar up to at least $45,000. But you have to act. Please give at pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. Your $50 gift means $100 to us. Any amount doubles. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I think y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, we're going to get back into the news. And, of course, one of the biggest issues in the news is the tax reform that has taken place. And this is part of what is called Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Let me, if I can, do my best to try to make some sense out of some of this and clear up a lot of misinformation. Some of it intentional, by the way, but some of the rest may be accidental. I'll do my best not to make any mistakes here as well. But part of the reason we oftentimes post various articles is so you can read it for yourself and sort it out. But let's first of all answer a couple of questions, and that is, when we see these tax cuts, this was perhaps the most significant cut in terms of the corporate tax. Moving that down from 35% to 21%. That may be the most significant and the one that is going to have the most far-reaching impact, I believe. But at the same time, there's also been essentially a cut for most individuals, and we'll explain how that plays out in a few minutes. The original plan was to move from 7 brackets to 4. That did not happen. They moved from 7 brackets to 7 brackets, but they did change some of the numbers. For example, those of you that have been in the 15% tax bracket, now you might be in the 12% tax bracket. Those of you in the 25% tax bracket now will be in the 22% tax bracket. So there are some benefits instantaneously. To me, the most significant one, and the one that seems to have been ignored by almost every Democrat and almost every media person criticizing this, is the raising of the standard deduction, essentially doubling it, not quite. Right now, the standard deduction for a single person is $6,350. That is raised to $12,000. It's almost double. The standard deduction for a married couple is $12,700. It goes to $24,000. Now, just think about this alone. Before we say anything else, 70% of Americans actually take the standard deduction. If I'm going to double the standard deduction before I talk about anything else, what do you think is going to happen? Your taxes are going to go down because you're going to have less taxes actually subject to taxation. Now, there's some other things going on. I just pointed out that if you were in the 15% tax bracket, now you're in the 12%. If you were in the 25%, you're in the 22%. But right off the bat, that helps. If you're a family, right now, the credit for a child, the child tax credit is $1,000. It's now $2,000. So again, does that help you if you're a family? Of course it does. Now, we've been hearing that all sorts of people's taxes will go up. Yes, a few will, and they almost all find themselves in situations where they live in states where they, up until recently, have been able to deduct from some of their expenses actually what they paid in state income tax. The most significant state that will maybe be affected by that would be California. But again, that's affecting individuals that itemize. Usually that tends to be higher income individuals. And so, as I will share in just a few minutes, when people say that this is going to reduce about 80% of the people in America's taxes, that's the case. Now, one of the other issues that is raised is that right now, the corporate tax rate has been implemented, and it is permanent. Now, first of all, nothing is permanent in Congress. I saw something the other day saying, don't think that the corporate tax rate will stay at 21%, and I don't believe that either. But okay, for the moment, it's permanent. However, you have by the year 2027, especially some of those credits that would help middle-income families evaporate. And you might say, well, that means their taxes are going to go up. Well, first of all, let's get into the real world. The real world is, will Congress between now and 2027 do something to make those tax cuts permanent? Sure, I'm sure that will happen. Show me a tax cut that has been withdrawn in the last couple of years, and I will show you a unicorn, because that doesn't happen. Now, you might say, well, then why didn't they make it permanent in the first place? That goes back to these arcane Byzantine rules that are necessary to get a budget passed, especially in the United States Senate. Wish we were different, just the way it is. So that's, the first thing to think about. But some of you are probably saying, okay, how is this going to affect me? My suggestion before we go to the break is if you have an opportunity to get to a computer, we have posted both on the Facebook page of Point of View Radio Talk Show, as well as pointofview.net. We have a link to a very good piece that was done by the Tax Foundation. And this one looks at 8 different individuals. Some are single, some are married. Some are single earners, some are double earners. Some have kids, some don't have kids. Some put money in a tax-deferred retirement a contribution, others don't. Some use the standard deduction, some itemize. And so I've used some examples in the past from the Heritage Foundation, which I think were pretty good. But because this has 8 different individuals ranging from an income of $30,000 or $50,000 or $70,000 all the way up to some that make $325,000 and one couple that makes $2 million. So they try to give you a long range of incomes and then a whole series of individuals in terms of different marital status. Some are single, some are married, some are single, no kids, some are single with kids, some are married with 2 kids, 3 kids, some have contributions, others do not. And what you can see as you work your way all the way across is, as far as I can tell, everybody is getting a tax cut. And so this, of course, illustrates the point we'll make when we come back from the break. And so, of course, if nothing else, if the question on your mind right now is, well, how will this affect me? That's a good question. But I think there's a bigger question I'd like to talk about, and that is, how will this affect the United States of America when we all of a sudden lower our corporate tax rate from one of the highest in the modern industrialized world, 35%, down to 21%, which it puts it just slightly below the average for the EU. What's that going to mean? Well, individuals in the past that said, well, I'm going to build these plants overseas because I will not have to pay the kind of taxes there. Of course, I won't have to pay the kind of wages, perhaps. Now some of them are saying, maybe it's better to just continue to build it here. There's anywhere from $1 trillion to $2 trillion. Most people think about $2 trillion that is overseas, and it is now possibly going to be repatriated. And when it is, this is all new money. Any kind of tax you pay on it is, 35% of zero is still zero, right? But 15% or 25% or 21% or whatever percent it might be on $2 trillion is still a lot of money. And so, again, that's going to bring money back and infuse this economy in ways that certainly are going to, I think, have a positive impact. And the thing that surprised everybody, especially some who were even critical of this tax reform bill, are the number of companies like AT&T and Boeing and FedEx and Comcast and others that said, if indeed this passes, we're going to pay a bonus out to the individuals. And, of course, starting with next year, individuals are going to see a little bit less taken out of their paycheck because they won't have to withhold as much, because they won't have to pay as much for the 2018 taxes. So if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Got a lot more to talk about. We will do that right after these messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, during this Christmas week, I've taken the time to discuss the theology of some of the Christmas hymns and carols that we sing. Today, I'd like to talk about the First Noel. It is an English song dating back to the 16th century. Some people believe that the First Noel was French because of the French spelling of Noel, but it is actually an English song. The French word Noel does mean Christmas and is relevant to the lyrics of the song. The First Noel was published in 1833 when it appeared in the work Christmas Carols Ancient and Modern. The first line of the song suggests a December date for the birth of Christ. The first Noel, the angels did say, was to certain poor shepherds in the fields as they lay, in the fields where they lay keeping their sheep on a cold winter's night that was so deep. Although many doubt that Jesus was born in December, there are some theologians, such as the author of the chronological aspects of the life of Christ, who believe that a December date is possible. Whatever the case about the date of the birth of Jesus, the song continues, "Born is the King of Israel." It reminds us that a king was born that night, yet few understood the significance of a birth in Bethlehem. Even the wise men from the east did not completely understand the significance of his birth, but they were guided to him by a star. For all to see there was a star shining in the east beyond them far, and to the earth it gave great light, and so it continued both day and night. The song continues on to say that 3 wise men came from a country far. The Bible does not tell us how many wise men there were. What we do know, there were 3 kinds of gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. What the Bible clearly teaches, however, is that Jesus was born and that he is the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. One of the issues we put on the table, of course, is the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and we've talked a little bit about what it might mean for you, what it might mean for America. Let's talk about process for just a minute. That's something we don't talk about too often, but it has been kind of intriguing to see that as well, because yesterday a number of people went out of their way to say that a person that deserved part of the credit for this, and this caught me off guard, was Ivanka Trump. Bob Corker actually said that Ivanka Trump deserves a lot of credit for the legislation's passage. Senator Tim Scott actually mentioned her name as well at the White House celebration, and I thought that was intriguing. And by the way, while we're talking about Senator Scott for just a minute, you may or may not have seen that a contributor to the Huffington Post sent out this Twitter comment, and I knew it was coming because when they were doing the celebration, front and center, one of the people front and center was Senator Tim Scott. And so this individual said, "What a shocker. There's one black person there," and sure enough, they have him standing right to the mic like a manipulated prop. Way to go. Well, I love, Senator Tim Scott didn't sit around on that one. On his post, he said, probably because I helped write the bill for the past year, have multiple provisions included, got multiple senators on board over the last week, and have worked on tax reform my entire time in Congress. But if you'd rather just see my skin color, please feel free. And so then they went back and forth a little bit. I won't get into all the details, but a lot of it was like, oh, he's just a prop. No, I actually think he was pretty much one of those individuals that also deserves some credit for this particular tax cut package. And again, as I mentioned just a minute ago, the thing that caught a lot of people off guard was this, the response from corporate America. Because the argument has been, well, if you give this tax cut to corporations, they'll just spend it on themselves. They'll just give higher salaries to their executives or whatever. And yet that's not exactly the response we've seen over the last, say, 12 to 15 hours. AT&T said that it will pay a $1,000 bonus as soon as President Trump signs the bill into law. They promised to invest an extra $1 billion in America next year. Boeing announced a plan to spend an additional $300 million on its employees and charities tied to the tax plan. Cincinnati Bank said that it would give a $1,000 bonus to its 13,500 employees and raise its minimum wage. Wells Fargo said it's matching that minimum wage and giving $400 million to charities. FedEx says that if tax cuts spur GDP growth, they're going to have to hire more individuals because they're expecting the economy to really take off. And some people are now saying we could actually get to not just 3% growth, but 4% growth in this fourth quarter. That's something that was predicting a while back. And then Comcast, one more, saying that they're giving out $1,000 bonuses to more than their 100,000 workers. So lots of things being said right now that seem positive. One of the articles we've posted for you to look at as well comes from our friend David French, who was in studio with us recently. And it's entitled, Dear Democrats, Ownership Isn't Theft. He says, I'm starting to think that all too many Democrats believe that private citizens and private corporations don't actually own their own private income or their private property. He says, otherwise, how can we explain the Democratic insistence repeatedly, endlessly over the last 24 hours that Republicans somehow are poised to execute a grand heist by cutting corporate and individual tax rates, granting an estimated 80.4% of taxpayers an average tax break of $2,140. He's using some calculations that have been done, estimating that more than 80% of taxpayers will have a tax break, and the average will be more than $2,000. And again, if you want the exact numbers and the link, it's one of our articles we've posted here today on the website. Because, again, he's reacting to, let me just take a couple of Twitter posts at random here. Nancy Pelosi, shamefully, Republicans are cheering against the children as they rob from their future and ransack the middle class to reward the rich. Chuck Schumer, yet again, Republicans showed their only priority is to give the richest few a bigger piece of the pie. And then, of course, the ones we've heard most often using the word heist, you've got Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. The bill that the Republicans jammed through the Senate tonight isn't tax reform, it's a heist. Let's call this out for what it is, government for sale. And what David French says is, note the key words. A tax cut is a heist. It's looting the government's money. You're robbing and ransacking the middle class. Now, he points out that Chuck Schumer is a little more measured, but even he acts like the government is giving people money by granting a tax break. Okay, let's come back to kind of government 101. As David French says, the traditional view of private income and private property is clear. You own and control the money you make or the property you possess. By the consent of the governed, the state can tax a portion of that money and regulate your use of your property, but the fundamental presumption remains it's your property, it's your money. And he goes on to explain that this is, obviously some rhetoric. These are talking points really trying to kind of get maybe some attention during the news cycle. But he then, a little bit later, and I'll let you read it in its entirety, talks about the fact that this is kind of a debate. He says the culture wars aren't static, the boundaries aren't fixed. The gospel of private ownership and personal property can and should win converts, especially when contrasted with the extraordinarily high real-world cost and staggering inefficiency of the Sanders-Warren model of immensely expanded government. But gospels need evangelists, and Republicans need to remember that good ideas still need good advocates. The policy is passed, the sales pitch is just beginning. And he's right. I think we'll probably spend some more time talking about this tomorrow on our Friday weekend edition. But how will this tax cut affect the next set of elections? Because I think you already understand what the talking points are. The individuals, at least that are following the lead of Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, Senator Warren and Senator Sanders are probably not necessarily running for re-election, but they are encouraging others who are running for re-election or those who want to take seats away from the Republicans. Talk about the fact that this tax reform bill was a heist or that it was looting the Treasury. And for a while, I suspect it might work because, as we've pointed out on this program earlier in this week and certainly a lot last week, the surveys show that a majority of Americans are convinced that this tax reform bill will actually cost them money. They were going to be in for a surprise because if you look at some of the charts we've posted and some of the material, you will see that across the board, we use, again, these examples from the Tax Foundation, and they have 8, but again, I've seen others that have used other different numbers, that whether you're single or married, whether you're a single earner or a double earner, whether you have children or don't have children, some will benefit more than others based upon whether or not, of course, they take the standard deduction or they itemize. Some will benefit more than others whether or not they have children because there'll be a $2,000 credit instead of a $1,000 credit. Mortgage interest rates, interestingly enough, are going to be capped. There's going to be a threshold, so very wealthy people might not benefit as much. Very wealthy people that live in blue states probably will not benefit as much, may actually see their taxes go up. But if you take the number that that David French has provided to us, 80.4% of taxpayers will get an average tax break of $2,140. Now, when people actually file the taxes, we'll get even a more accurate number, but that's an estimate put together by some people that have been looking at those numbers a lot longer than you and I. And I think it illustrates, again, what maybe is going to unfold over these next few months. Let's take a break. When we come back, we already have some phone calls, so we'll take those calls, 1-800-351-1212, and also encourage you, as we do go to a break, to consider what you might do to support this ministry. We do depend upon your financial gifts to bring this ministry to you every single day and to really try to give you facts and figures and numbers and other resources. So, again, a couple of articles, one from the Wall Street Journal, another one from National Review. We have, of course, the book that we talked about in the first hour and some other things, as well as a link that might give you a little bit of a hint as to how these tax cuts in this particular bill might affect you and your family. And if you appreciate some of that news and information we try to give to you and all the other kinds of things we talk about on Point of View, we encourage you to go to the website, pointofview.net. Click on that banner. We have a $45,000 matching challenge, and certainly your gift would be greatly appreciated. As we mentioned last Friday, some of you might have had appreciated stock. If you would want to actually give to this ministry, it's better for you to give the stock to us, because then you get the full write-off, but you don't have to pay the capital gains. And so it's a tremendous benefit both to you and to us. And if you want to know more about that, or if you would like to give a gift, let me again give the order line number. It's 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. If you'd like to talk to someone about giving a gift of any size, we would greatly appreciate it. That gift will be doubled, and we certainly encourage you to be generous. We'll be back with your phone calls right after this.
Today, you can make a difference, but you have to act. Recently, Kerby sat down with a couple in California, Stan and Jennifer. Jennifer said, like many Christians, they were concerned about the direction of the culture, but simply hoped something would change. On one of her regular walks through the neighborhood, listening to the radio, she happened across Point of View, and before long, she was convinced wishing things would change was not enough. She began taking what she was learning and applying it and sharing it. She even went to the state capitol in Sacramento to stand up for what she believes. You would be surprised how much difference one Jennifer can make, and how many Jennifers you can inspire by giving to Point of View. Your gift today will shape hearts and minds across the nation, helping to shape our future. And thanks to a surprise donor challenge, your gift will be doubled up to at least $45,000. Give today at pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. Answer the challenge. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
I'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let's take your comments and questions, and let's start off with a question real quickly here in Missouri, KTTK. Scott, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you, Kerby. I was watching the news a couple of days ago, and it was still, at that time they were saying they were still debating whether or not they were going to have charitable contributions, something that you could still claim on long form or not. And I just wondered if that was debated, if that was still part of it, or did it, or daughter said, "No, I didn't hear you say anything about it, so I'm hoping that's a good sign." Thank you.
Sure. And again, it's interesting that you heard that, because I don't know anybody that has at any point in this debate questioned whether or not to keep charitable deductions. So I'm really wondering where that report came from. And you're not the first person to call in and ask that question, because it's certainly not even one of those on the table. But again, everything is the same except for some of the things we've talked about. Of course, the standard deduction nearly doubled. The child credit tax credit doubled. Now a threshold for mortgage interest reductions. And as we mentioned before, a reduction for what some people could get in terms of their state and local taxes. One that I did not mention, which I meant to, but just didn't get around to it, on the estate tax, the exclusion is now doubled. And so that's the so-called death tax or estate tax. But most of these others have always been part of that in the first place. So the fact that you're the second person calling, I'd like to go back. Maybe I'll do a research and try to see if that was surfacing in any kind of debate or discussion, because I certainly don't see it in any of the provisions, nor do I see it in any of the discussions that were taking place. But let's take some more phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. David in California, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Well, hi, Kerby. By the way, happy holidays. We're what are we in, the solstice right now? In just the old generic solstice.
Well, I'm willing to say Merry Christmas, but you can say solstice, and you're welcome on the show. So what do you want to say?
Well, I think with that previous caller, he's partially right, but it's not a specific thing that it's written into it that the deduction is not there. What it is that they've lowered it from 35% to 20%. They didn't do the art of the deal and lower it to 27% or 29.3% or whatever. They just did a flat 35 down to 20. And when you start thinking of all of the charities that normally would have been donated to with that 15%, now all of a sudden they don't even have a need to donate anymore. They can just keep the money, and that's that.
Well, first of all, I really want to check on that one, because that's kind of new information for me. But I know that, the question that came up, and it happened under the Obama administration, is whether the highest income earners would get the full deduction. And so I know sometimes that has been the case, but I'm still planning on giving whether I get deductions or not. So I think if that really is a real problem, why isn't it I'm not hearing from a lot of the other charities about this? There's no hue and cry out here right now. Christians are probably going to give to their churches, but believe me, if I want people to give to the American Cancer Society, or I want people to give to the ACLU or to Planned Parenthood or whatever, I haven't heard anybody fussing about that. So I need to probably check that out.
There. I mean, doesn't it make sense that if you just do a flat drop from 35 to 20? In fact, they had conferences for months before this, and they had talked to, interviewed the top CEOs of all of these corporations, and many of them were saying, don't even bother. This is too crazy. We're just going to keep the money for our dividends. We're going to give it to our shareholders. We're not going to give it to, we're not going to reinvest here in America. And in fact,
something what you're doing is we were talking about charitable deductions. You're talking about the corporate income tax, aren't you? You changed the topic. Well, see, we were just talking with Scott about the charitable. Yeah, we're talking about charitable deductions is what we were talking about with Scott. So, okay, I mean, I was just not even tracking on that at all. That's a good point, though. What's going to happen with some of these repatriated assets? That's been a big question that people have had. Okay, if we've got $1 million, we've got $1 trillion, we've got $2 trillion, whatever the number is, although most people tend to think that it's probably $1 trillion or $2 trillion. Let's talk about that for just a minute, because in the bill, if there is actually a lower rate, and so that's a good point, because when you are actually repatriating some of the money, this is money overseas, maybe Apple has it over there, or IBM has it in other countries, to bring it back, if it's real estate, it's at 8%. If it's cash or it's stock or liquid assets, it's at 15%. So that's a good point, that now, if indeed they want to bring that money back, that's new money. And that's something I don't think people have realized, because if that money has been sitting overseas, 35% of zero is still zero. But 15.5% of $1 trillion is a whole lot more money. So this is almost like you're getting new money into the system. And there have been a lot of people saying, well, isn't this really kind of risky? Because I think that's what David was originally going to talk about. Is it too risky to actually increase the standard deduction from $6,350 to $12,000? Or isn't it risky to double the child tax credit? Isn't it risky to actually lower the corporate tax from 35% to 21%? Well, in some respects, what it may actually do is increase, for example, especially when we talk about corporations, the kind of investment that we have wanted to take place for some time. But also there is going to be most likely a lot of money that's been sitting overseas that will come back into this country. When it comes back into this country, we have a little bit of an idea of what some of it might go towards. We just heard that AT&T and Boeing and Wells Fargo and others certainly have been willing to invest in their people. And, of course, they would also invest in equipment. And that would be like an instantaneous tax benefit to the American people without having to pay the taxes. So that's one of those kind of really intriguing kinds of things that has played itself out. And so maybe that's another way to look at that whole idea of lowering not only the corporate tax rate, but actually repatriating all sorts of money that's been sitting overseas. But one of the other articles I want to mention real quickly before we take a break, and then we'll get some more phone calls, is a piece that came out the other day from the editors of the Wall Street Journal, and it was entitled Democrats Against Tax Reform. And what they're saying is, and this is something that has concerned a few listeners, I could certainly understand that. If indeed we're going to do something for the benefit of Americans, it would sure be nice if sometime in the future, we haven't been able to do it in the past, but sometime in the future we could come up with a bipartisan measure. Recognize that the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, passed basically with only Democratic votes and no Republican votes. This time, tax reform is passed only with Republican votes and no Democratic votes. And the editors of the Wall Street Journal remind us that that isn't really the way it used to be. They say a little history shows how remarkable this is. The Kennedy marginal tax rate cuts were pushed by White House economist Walter Heller and powered the economic expansion for another half-decade. In the 1981 tax debate, William Broadhead of Michigan and other Ways and Means Democrats offered an amendment that cut the top rate on investment income from 50% to 70% in the first year. The 1986 tax reform was driven as much by Democrats as by Ronald Reagan. Dick Gephardt and Dan Rostenkowski helped move it through the House, and Bill Bradley was a leading architect in the Senate. 33 Democrats voted for the bill that passed the Senate 74-23 and cut the top marginal rate to 28%. Bill Clinton raised taxes in 1993, but after his reelection, he compromised with Newt Gingrich in 1997 to cut the capital gains tax rate to 20% from 28%. That drove investment and growth through the rest of the decade. And even as recently, they say, as 2001, a dozen Democrats in the Senate and 28 in the House compromised with George W. Bush to cut the top income tax rate to 35%. Yet this year, not a single Senate Democrat was willing, now we can say, to vote to cut the tax rate a mere 2.6 percent points to 37%, or reform or corporate tax code that Democrats have long recognized as anti-competitive. Had they engaged with Republicans to provide 60 votes, they surely would have influenced the bill. Would have been good to see a Senator Manchin or someone in the Senate who is a Democrat to have worked with the Republicans. Now, he did say that the Republicans didn't reach out to him, but, he could have reached out to them. And it is, I think, a sad commentary that both in the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, it was passed only with Democratic votes. And in this particular case, only Republicans voted for tax reform. So if you don't think it's a good idea, you can use the old Pottery Barn philosophy. You break it, you own it. Got a feeling they're going to be glad they own it. We'll be right back.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. As the school semester winds down to Christmas break, it's important to take a look at all the ways students might exercise their religious freedom in celebration of the holidays. First, schools can celebrate Christmas just as easily as they can celebrate winter. Doing so provides an educational perspective of world history and the effect of religion upon culture. Schools can also deck the halls in Christmas decorations. Decorations can further the cultural and religious heritage educationally important to the holiday. Third, schools can include Christmas-themed artistic expressions in school plays. As long as it's presented in an objective manner reflecting the traditions of Christmas, it's just fine. It is fine for students to wish one another Merry Christmas or Happy Hanukkah, and even hand out gifts significant to their religious tradition. As they can throughout the year, students can also reference their faith in school assignments, class discussions, and private speeches during the holidays. The First Amendment is not suspended during the Christmas season. And finally, school employees can discuss their religious holiday traditions outside of their official roles as educators. This means teachers can attend Christmas parties and religious gatherings outside of work without fearing the loss of their job. With that, perhaps the best way to conclude is merely to say Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, and best wishes for a Happy New Year to all our students. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. I hope you enjoyed this episode of First Liberty Briefing. You can learn more amazing stories about how everyday Americans are standing up and saving religious freedom. Just visit firstliberty.org. You'll be inspired, educated, and informed. Visit firstliberty.org right now.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. If not, I hope you will join us tomorrow for our Friday Roundtable. Going to go through all sorts of things that have been taking place, not only over the last week or month, but over this last year. Kind of give you a summary of some of the significant things that happened, some of the missed opportunities, and Penedexter Kelly Shackelford will be here to help us out. And Scott raised a good question a minute ago, and I still am a little bit puzzled by it, but I think I at least have an idea. During the break, I went and found some articles that were expressing the concern, and there are only a few, expressing the concern that charitable giving might decline, and the reason it was given hadn't even crossed my mind until I started reading the article, is that when you raise the standard deduction, imagine now if your standard deduction is $12,700 for a married couple, and now your standard deduction is $24,000, it means that you might, if you're sort of on the cusp there, might not necessarily benefit by itemizing your deductions. And so the implication, it's a little convoluted, but let's work our way out through it, is that some people might be less inclined to give because they don't get a tax benefit. Now, I've always said before that's a concern, I think, more for other nonprofits than it is for your church. If I were to tell you tomorrow that you were not going to get a tax benefit for your gift to your local church, would your giving change? Yeah, for some of you it might. I think for most of us we'd say, no, I still believe that I should give to my church, I should tithe, I should be generous because that's what God has commanded me to do, and you're not going to change. As I was trying to share a minute ago, David and I were actually on two different issues, I realized. The people that are going to really suffer are those who aren't necessarily always giving just out of the goodness of their heart, but maybe they believe in the organization, but they also want to get a tax benefit. And so this is going to affect, I think, some that might give to the American Heart Association, the American Cancer Association, their local hospital, their local school, ACLU, Planned Parenthood, Sierra Club, whatever it might be. I guess Sierra Club doesn't have a tax-exempt status now, but whoever it might be, those would be, I think, more affected than will some of the religious organizations and the Christian organizations. But anyway, the bottom line is charitable deductions are not affected at all, but I can now at least see why some people would raise the question if indeed you are going to nearly double the standard deduction. Some people that before benefited by itemizing their deductions wouldn't benefit, and so I can see that. Just before we run out of time, though, I do want to come back to something that I think is very significant that happened in the United Nations today. UN voted to condemn the United States based upon our decision to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. First of all, we haven't done so. We've simply said that we were going to do so. This is something we've said since 1995. We said we were going to do so. But President Bill Clinton did not do it, President George W. Bush did not do it, and President Barack Obama did not do it. It looks like President Donald Trump will do it, and you had 128 countries vote against us, 9 voted with us, and 35 abstained. When you talk about the countries that voted with us, it's United States, Israel, Guatemala, Honduras, and then a lot of other countries you hardly even know, like Micronesia, Marshall Islands, whatever. Of the 35 abstentions, the two most significant, I guess, would be Canada and Mexico, but we couldn't even get Canada and Mexico to agree with us on that. And we had those who opposed us are like the United Kingdom, really? Russia? Of course, we expect North Korea, but nevertheless, that's the case. I love what Nikki Haley, who is our UN ambassador, said. She said, when a nation is singled out for attack in this organization, that nation is disrespected. What's more, that nation is asked to pay for the privilege of being disrespected. In the case of the United States, we are asked to pay more than anyone else for that dubious privilege. She said the United States is by far the largest single contributor to the United Nations. So she said, we'll be honest with you. When we make generous contributions to the UN, we'll also have a legitimate expectation that our goodwill is recognized and respected. She also goes on to say this decision does nothing to harm peace efforts. Rather, President Trump's decision reflects the will of the American people and the right as a nation to choose the location of our embassy. There is no need to describe it further. The decision is in accordance with a law dating back to 1995. So we might talk a little bit more about that tomorrow, but they also have made some statements about, are we going to continue to disproportionately fund the United Nations so we can be disrespected like that? And Donald Trump has said, maybe we just need to rethink foreign aid, too. If our country continually votes against us in the United Nations and condemns us for a decision to locate our embassy in Jerusalem, maybe we should rethink whether or not we should send money to those countries. So love to get your comments on that as well. But let me end with Ben Shapiro. He said this has been a pretty good month for Donald Trump, passing the tax reform plan as complete with the repeal of the individual mandate, which we haven't really talked about today, but we'll get into that more tomorrow. He announced earlier this month that the official policy of the United States would be to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital and stated that we would move our embassy there. He's appointed 12 circuit court judges so far, more than any other president ever in his first year of an administration. The economy continues to gain momentum with a third quarter growth estimated to be nearly 4% and a stock market reaching record highs. ISIS seems to be in the death throes. Special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation of collusion between Russia and the Trump campaign looks like more and more like an empty farce. So as he points out, the biggest challenge, I think, for the Trump administration is that not everybody believes all of that. Because, as he said, as Guy Benson points out, taxpayers in every single income quartile, including the middle three, will see their after-tax incomes rise due to the plan's cuts, both immediately and in the medium term. Yet somehow the bill has just 26% approval rating, and 50% of Americans, as we mentioned on numerous occasions here on Point of View, wrongly believe that taxes will rise once it's implemented. And he says there's two reasons for this. The first is obvious. The media's biased coverage, including the ludicrous assertion that the bill somehow redistributes wealth from the bottom to the top, has perverted the truth. But the second, he said, is less obvious but no less true. Donald Trump's personal unpopularity and the general lack of trust Americans have in him mean that they won't take his word for it even when he's telling the truth. And that, I think, is going to be a real challenge, not only for the Trump administration, but for this next election, because even when he tells the truth, in this case, your taxes will go down, a lot of people say, I don't believe it. And so that's going to be all the more reason for you to check out some of the facts and figures in some of these particular issues. And that's why we've posted a couple of stories for you to follow. And in particular, take a look at this one from the Tax Foundation. It gives you a scenario for 8 different individuals. Some are single, some are married, some have children, some don't have children, some have a standard deduction, some have itemizing. Find one that looks kind of like you and see if that might give you at least a hint as to how this particular tax reform package will affect you. And we have posted that on the website, pointofview.net. It's also on our Facebook page there as well. As we conclude, let me just again encourage you to consider what you might do to give before year end. Recognize that a week from tomorrow, that will be the last broadcast we'll have in 2017. 2 weeks from today, we're already in 2018. So if you've been waiting to the last few days, time has come. And because we have a $45,000 matching challenge, that means your gift will be doubled. So do anything you can to help us out, and we would appreciate your financial gift. I want to thank Andrew and Elisa for their help behind the scenes. Have a great day. We will see you back here tomorrow for our Friday Weekend Edition.
Taylor has been listening to Point of View Radio for about 12 years, which is pretty remarkable considering today he's only 25.
In high school, when I first became aware of the political spectrum and all that, I was a conservative ideologue, basically, going with whatever conservatives said. But after listening to the show over the years, I've realized that I'm supposed to be for truth. I'm supposed to be a Christian and then a conservative. And I'm supposed to look at all this that's going on around us in today's culture through a biblical lens. And I can't thank y'all enough for that.
The you Taylor is thanking is you. People like you are the heroes who have patiently invested in Point of View Radio and made it possible to shape hearts and minds across the nation, which in the long run helps to shape our future. And you can be twice the hero today because we have a matching challenge which doubles your investment dollar for dollar up to at least $45,000. But you have to act. Please give at pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. Your $50 gift means $100 to us. Any amount doubles. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.